Good afternoon, and I'm glad this morning to have my dear friend Yinka Oyekan here to share with us. My name's James. I'm the church leader at Bishopbriggs Community Church. Yinka will introduce himself a little bit more, but it's great to have you, Yinka. Thank you so much for coming and being part of our conversation today. You know,
the real privilege to be here, James. Thank you for having me, and thank you to Keith for asking me to speak into the network. It's a real honor and a real privilege.
Thank you. And you already are known to Keith, myself, and many other leaders here in Scotland, Yinka, not least through the past few years as we've worked together in the Turning. But for those who may not know you, could you please just give us a brief intro to yourself, to your family, to your ministry?
Yeah, no, so I was born in Edinburgh, so I'm a Scottish Nigerian. I grew up in Edinburgh till I was 9. I went to primary school there, then went back to Nigeria. I didn't realize at the time that my dad was the king of Lagos. So I had a bit of a mixed upbringing, you know, going from never being in only ever being in a taxi once when I was in Edinburgh, to being picked up by an Oldsmobile with electronic windows when I got to Lagos. So very surreal, very strange upbringing. And I got saved in Wesley Hills Baptist Church. So I've spent my life really serving the Lord, doing evangelism, planting churches, and I'm a Baptist minister at the moment in Reading, in England. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And doing wonderful work. I think you also failed to mention, Yinka, you're currently the president of the Baptist Union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's right as well, eh? Am I right in that?
Great Britain, yeah, includes Northern Ireland.
So, Yinka, we're talking here about stuff that I feel that we're walking on holy ground whenever we go there. The whole world was moved deeply when George Floyd was killed by a police officer in the streets of Minnesota, Minneapolis, on the 25th of May. His last words, "I can't breathe." And just before passing out and dying, those were his last words. He cried out for his mum. Now, evidence shows us that there's a global problem with racism, systemic racism, and actually, some people might think it's just an American problem, but actually some of the evidence that you have shared shows us it's a UK problem. Could you please tell us, Yinka, why do you think race and racial equality is still an issue today in the 21st century in modern Britain? Is this a kairos moment we're in? Is there something that's to be done, that's to be finished now, that's to be established in these days, that's not yet done?
Okay, so if you look at racism as it exists today, there are 5 clear places where racism manifests itself that affects the everyday life of people of color. And I say people of color on purpose because I think anybody who's not white will experience a level of racism. Now, the best way to describe it, you know, as a Scotsman, I remember when the British government imposed the poll tax on Scotland. And we as a people felt powerless. We were mad as you know, as mad could be at the injustice of being used as a nation to have an experiment. It was awful. And in a sense, being powerless is having things done to you that you just don't want. You know, you have no say in it. There's nothing you can do. So there are 5 areas. It exists in the workplace. Studies in America have shown that Black people have got to work twice as hard to keep their job or even hope for a promotion in America. Okay, we know, but that's also true over here. You'll find that over here, a lot of Africans change their names to English-sounding names. I never did it because God spoke to me when I got saved and said, "I give you your name, you better stick with it." So I never changed my name. But you'll notice that a lot of Black people that want to progress in workplace will change their name to Michael or John or Andrew. And actually, if you find out what their real name is, and that's because racism exists in the workplace. Racism exists in the church. I mean, you know, if you look at all the denominations that we have, I'm one of the few Black national leaders in a traditional denominational church. The historic racism that existed in the church is the reason why we have Black and white churches. when immigrants came over from Jamaica, for example, over here in the 60s, and they tried to join white churches, they were told to leave and not come back. Okay, so that's how the black churches started out. Now, of course, everybody's desperate to have unity because we've evolved, we've progressed from that racist attitude that existed in the church to now recognizing actually we all need each other. If we're going to save our nation, see our nations turn to Christ, then we need every color of But that's why we have black and white churches. It's not because black people wanted to start up their own churches; it's because they weren't welcome. So racism exists in the church, and if you look today at the UK, at all the leadership level of all the major denominations, you will hardly find a black person in senior leadership. That's how bad it actually is. Okay. Now, in some places, of course, there are no black people. Like Cornwall, there's hardly any black people in Cornwall. They are there, but in terms of the church context, it's really tough. So there are, there are places where that's hard, but there are many places where it's not hard, and you still don't see a difference.
Yeah.
Racism exists, and this is where it gets really painful, in the judicial system. So the judicial system and the legal system is, by its own record and account, government figures and government statistics, institutionally racist. So if you're a black person anywhere in England or Wales, you are 9 times more likely to be stopped by the police and searched for drugs, even though black people don't take drugs at any greater rate than white people. So in terms of population and abuse of substances, you get the same proportions in both white population and black population. It's the same proportions. But if you're black, you're going to be stopped 9 times, and that's true in England and Wales, of every police force in the country, not just London. Every police force in the country, you are more likely to be stopped if you're black and searched for drugs than if you're white, even though there's no difference. So, and then when you get to the court system, what needs to be understood is when you get into the legal system for the same crimes, crimes that you could say are, the factors in them are very similar. You will get longer prison sentences. So think about this carefully. 9 times more likely to be stopped. So there's 9 times more representation in the legal system than there should be for black and people of color. And then when you get into the prison system, you're 9.1 times more likely to receive an immediate custodial sentence for a similar crime as committed by a white person. So when people say, why are there so many black people in prison? So I think it's something like in England and Wales, something like 40% of the kids that are in prison are black kids. Why is that? It's because they're 9 times more likely to be stopped and 9 times more likely to be put in prison for the same offense. And it's also shown because in England and Wales, you have to record the ethnicity of the criminal. And you have to record, when they get into the system, what happened to them, the disposal. And in the themselves down here, it's incredible because it's absolutely the case that if you're a white kid, you get a shorter prison sentence than if you're a black or an Asian or a Chinese or any other color kid. And so there's this systemic racism. And even when it comes to, we all know that teachers are in it not for the money. Teachers are in it because they love kids. But even when it comes to the education system, in the A-levels, when it comes to predicted grades, which is why there was a bit of an outcry from the black community about using predicted grades because of coronavirus and people not being able to do exams.
Yeah.
When it comes to black kids, the government figures show that predicted grades for black kids are 60% less accurate than for every other racial group. So in other words, black kids, 60% of black kids did better than were predicted, much better than were predicted. So it shows you that even in the education system, there's this bias to thinking you're black and you're not going to do so well. So this is what black people have to face on a daily basis. It's systemic, it's in the judiciary, it's in education, it's in the workplace, but they don't talk about it. What's happened with George Floyd was that suddenly, there was a volcano eruption, and and if you talk to black people that you know as friends and you just listen, remember, for them, it's a life experience. For you, if you're white, it's an academic exercise, okay? For them, this is real pain and real hurt they're going through on a daily basis. If you talk to your black colleagues and you listen to their stories, you'll be amazed. And a lot of pastors don't realize there's a pastoral need to love people who are constantly having to brush off things that you and I would not accept. I've got sharp elbows. I'll rumble with the toughest of them. But not everybody have got sharp elbows. Not everybody can speak up. Not everybody can fight for themselves. And that's where we need the pastors. And one final thing I'll say about this, Scotland is the most beautiful part of our United Kingdom. And I say that not because I'm biased. I say it because it's true. The Scottish people are the most loving, embracing, and kind of all peoples in these islands. Of that, I have no doubt. You know, Scotland's like a big family. Yes, of course, there are racists everywhere. And they're even racist in Black communities. So racism isn't just the preserve of white people. Black people can be racist too. But what I do know about Scotland is this, that the National Front is going to have a really tough time getting any foothold in Scotland, because the Scottish people just love people. And, but do we have a problem? Yes, there's a problem. Is there a problem in Scotland? Yeah, there's a problem in Scotland. And you'll find that your Black members of your church, you'll find that they struggle, and they have a hard time of it as well.
I made a point, Yinka. I suppose I've had lots of pastoral conversations. We're delighted to have people of Black, Asian, minority ethnic background part of our church. They enliven it, they enrich it. We're talking here about the diverse beauty of the church. And they bring cultural experience, they bring cultural values that just enrich our servant-heartedness, culture of honour, so many things. But to actually stop for a moment, which I did, and just say, look, dear brother, dear sister, could you please tell me, let me hear your heart. What has your experience of racism been over the years, maybe more recently, or even in church? I'm going to ask, even in church. I can tell you it was a revelation. Just being intentional about asking that question. So can I ask you, Yinka, please tell us how it's been for you. How's racism, whether it's personal or relational or maybe systemic, impacted you, your family? You've got a wonderful family, and any others you know. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, okay. So as I said earlier on, because of my upbringing was both in Scotland and Nigeria. Of course, I've got a very different mindset. I had to deal with any sense of pride. You know, growing up as a prince, it's all downhill from there. When you grow up as a prince, everything's downhill after that. But I had to deal with this idea of superiority, that actually I'm no better than anybody else. It doesn't matter by what grace God has put me in the family, put me in. So I had to deal with that stuff in my own heart, and I think, which shows that all of us have got to make sure we've not got stuff in our heart of superiority, of being better than. And the other thing, of course, is because I was brought up partially in Nigeria, I learned how to fight for what I want and what I need and what I want to get. So, I've tended to brush off racist experiences as ignorance, really, because that's what it is. It's fear and ignorance. But in a personal level, my eldest son did amazing, got an amazing law degree, and but he applied for over 40 jobs using his Nigerian name, Joe Yoba. He applied for over 40 jobs. He didn't even get a look in. This is while he was still at uni, because he's hardworking. He's worked hard from when he was doing his A-levels, and I mean work as well as study. And so he was like used to if he got his foot in the door, he gets the job. So he changed his name to Aaron. He uses his Christian name, Aaron, and uses his first name as his surname, Joye, Aaron. And he applied for 3 jobs under that pseudonym. All three offered him an interview, and all 3 offered him the job when they saw him. Wow. So his name was an immediate block. 40 applications, 3 in the pseudonym, and he got offered, and this Black Lives stuff has helped him. He wrote to all his colleagues, because he's been headhunted several times now. But he's written to all his colleagues saying, I'm using my real name because, since George Floyd. But this is why I didn't use my real name initially. So it does affect our kids, all our kids, Black kids, all the kids all the kids that you see in your church who are Black kids. They've got a real battle just to get the foot in the door. And I think being aware of that means you can give pastoral support, like when they're going off from uni to look for work. Now that our white colleagues understand the problems of their church members who are Black and the struggles they're facing, you can be better pastorally prepared to love them and help them and support them and express concern.
So there was 3 families that I spoke to in particular, and all of them relayed exactly what you said. We ourselves, we're fine. We just know that they're ignorant. But our children, when they come home and tell us the names they've been called, and we know that kids can be rough and stuff like that. But thankfully, where they have spoken out, that has been such a help. But not everybody wants to. And others were saying we did not get business, and we are pretty sure that it's probably because of our race. It's very
and of course, we believe that racial identity is created by God to serve humanity in expressing, to a limited extent, the immeasurable richness of the image of God. Wow. So we're all made in God's image, and Satan hates God's image. It doesn't, whether, I often have a joke and say God really must love the Chinese expression of his image because he made so many of them. We're all in the image of God. And when you see the face of another human being, you see the face of God. It's Satan who hates the image of God, and Satan who wants to crush that image and oppress it. And of course, most Christian leaders and most Christians would be horrified at the idea that they were in any way carrying any kind of racist. So most of our any racist ideologies, I have been surprised at 1 or 2 down south who I would not have pegged as being racist. Since all this has blown up, I would never have thought they would have a racist attitude. For example, one individual, a chap named Malcolm, takes every opportunity, and by the way, I've taken to naming people unashamedly. Happily posts pictures of Black people, people of color who are misbehaving, consistently posts misdemeanors of Black people, Black people trying to get themselves, trying to imply the police were trying to arrest them unlawfully when they were actually being criminal. In other words, the narrative is Black people are bad. And then posts another one of white people defending a statue being cuddly and warm and just misunderstood, in other words, implying these racists are just nice, cuddly people who, the right wing. And you suddenly realize, wow, why would you do that? Why would you highlight the misdemeanors of Black people consistently on your page? There's something not quite right about a Christian doing that. Of course, there are criminals everywhere, and Black people shouldn't be allowed to get off with crime any more than white people do. But what the figures show us is Black people are targeted by the system. That's what's got to stop. Equity is important. We're Christians. We believe in justice. We believe that people should, work hard, earn a good crust, provide for their family, and obey the law. Okay, we believe that. But we shouldn't target any minority. In fact, it's a curse upon the nation when minorities are unjustly treated. That's what God said. God said he will deal severely with such a nation which unjustly oppresses the widow, the orphan, or the alien. So it's in our interest to do the right thing by minorities in our midst.
Yinka, one final question, and that is really, I suppose, on us, but we would love to hear from you. How can we better support, pray for, speak out against, be active for racial justice and for our Black, Asian and minority ethnic brothers and sisters? How can we better do things and better be the body of Christ in this moment and as we move forward, particularly here in Scotland, because we want to humbly listen and we want to learn from our fellow leaders and from yourself?
Well, so there's a number of things. One, there's a group of ministers that are now gathering in Scotland. There's a group that I've helped to put together. I really would love it if Keith would mentor, support, stand with them, because there's no way Black community is going to be able to push and deal with the challenges they face without the support and help of our white colleagues. We can't do it without our white colleagues. It's not just going to be possible. silence is violence. You've heard that phrase, silence is violence, and people get really wound up about it. The reason why silence is violence is because actually, even legally, the law tells you, if you see a child being abused and you say nothing, you're complicit in that abuse.
Yeah.
You know, that's what the law says. And as Christians, we should have higher standards. So to watch people being oppressed, knowing people are being oppressed and saying nothing is itself a form of violence against the individual. So we should speak up, as you said, which is what your organization is doing, which is amazing. The other thing to note is that, you know, you need to understand that the whole thing about Black Lives Matter, the statement, is very different to Black Lives Matter, the organization. So even Black leaders are not really comfortable with the idea of Black Lives Matter, the organization. They're really nervous about it. And that's because they don't want to be seen to be promoting political ideology. That's not what this is about. But the statement, Black Lives Matter, well, that is important. Of course, Black lives do matter. Now, it's important to understand why it's really important to say that as a leader, that Black Lives Matter. And I'll tell you why it's really important. It's important because, because when people start saying things like, well, all lives matter. Well, of course, all lives matter, but all lives aren't being persecuted unjustly in our system at the moment, okay? You know, Black people are particularly being oppressed at the moment in our systems. That's why it matters to say it, to acknowledge the fact that there's a wrong and injustice being done and to speak out about it. So I think if Keith could, I'd love to introduce Keith to this group that's been formed in Scotland of ministers from different parts of Scotland, Black ministers. What we've been doing down in the South has revitalized their energy, and they now want to do something about it. And the final thing I'd say about some of the stuff that's happening around statues and the pulling down of statues, and I'm conflicted like everybody else about that. I don't really know what to think. What I do understand though is that our kids, that's your kids and my kids, white, brown, black, because they're the ones that have been out on the streets protesting.
Yeah.
They've now grown up with Black people next door to them. You know, the world is more cosmopolitan. They see that the other is not so different to them. They see the same pains, the same struggles, and these are their best friends. They're getting married to Black people, or they know somebody who's married to somebody who's Black or Asian or whatever. And so they're incensed at the injustice they're seeing their friends go through. Our kids are not putting up, whereas the previous generation, if you saw a Black person, that was amazing. You know, you probably just stare at them in the street and say, ooh, there's a Black person. You know, so the previous generation, there weren't a lot of Black people around, but the current generation, and what's happening with their statues, just you know, because I'm as conflicted about the pulling down of statues as everybody else is, okay? But what's happening with it is they're saying, we don't want those values. We don't like, you've not told us the whole of the history. You've not told us, for example, that Winston Churchill killed by his policies 3 million Asians. You never told us that in the history books when we went to school. We've found that out ourselves. You've hidden it. We don't want him anymore. So that's what's going on. Now, I think if history was honest and people share the good and the bad, I don't think statues would be being pulled down. I think people would say, well, we know that, we know that, right? You know, but because some of this stuff has been hidden, yeah. I think there's a very different case though when it comes to people who've profited of slavery. I think statues of people who've profited of slavery cannot be celebrated. It's a bit like this. Do you think, ask yourself this question, would Jesus celebrate this person in heaven? And for what they've done? And I think when you ask yourself that question, you know, is Jesus going to celebrate, for example, Colson from Bristol for his slave trade? I don't think he'd put a statue up for him. I think he might put up one for Mother Teresa. So we need to understand that our youngsters are the ones who are rebelling against the history being handed down to them. And if we don't negotiate with them, we'll lose them. Okay, so it's not about us. It's about their heroes that they want to put up in plinth. It's about the heroes they want to celebrate. And us just arguing against it isn't going to make a toss of difference, because they are going to, when they're in power, they're going to put up their statues and they'll pull down the ones they want to pull down. Yeah. So better to negotiate now than just rail against it all. And yeah, anyway, so I hope that, I don't know how much of that's helpful, but I hope it is helpful.
Thank you, Yinka. You've given us some wonderful insights, and We've got some conversations that we're going to have, and we're going to hear from some other people. And I want to, just on behalf of the Scottish Network, thank you for sharing with us. And it's good to be with you again, my friend, although on Zoom. Very soon we'll hopefully be at the other side of this with a different perspective on life as a whole. And it does feel that there's a kairos moment, there's a now moment that I think I shared with you. I think this is a time for dreams, the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. to be fully realised in our time. And I wonder, Yinka, would you just pray briefly for us as we close?
Yeah. Father, I want to thank you, Lord, for the Scottish Network Churches. I want to thank you for Keith and his heart to ensure that in the movement there is racial equity and comfort, understanding, pastoral care for his nation. And Father, I want to thank you for Scotland being a nation of individuals who show compassion and understand the value of their clan, their family, and being together and being strong together. So Father, just pray, Lord, for Scottish Networks churches, the leaders that are listening to all this, that, Lord, the things that I've said that are helpful, they'll be able to embrace, and those that they struggle with, they'll be able to go and reflect on and think through, Lord. Bless the gathering. Bless the leaders. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.